The second annual Economic Times Fraud and Investigation Summit 2015 was held in New Delhi with an aim to bring together senior policy makers and industry leaders on a common platform to discuss various fraud prevention measures. The summit started off with a keynote address by Rohit Mahajan, Senior Director and Head Forensic Financial Advisory, Deloitte, where he stressed the need for corporate compliance.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for being present for this session. Really appreciate it. You know, every organization has a policy on zero tolerance, right? But there is a flexibility, right? There is a flexibility. If the fraud is for $1,000, ignore it. He's a top talent. How does it matter if he's taking stationery home, right? He's doing enough for the company. Let him take stationery home. What you've done is you've not demonstrated zero tolerance. You've actually demonstrated acceptability to a behavior which is just the tip of the iceberg or maybe the starting point. And where it might land you, right, no one knows. So I think when you talk about zero tolerance needs to be demonstrated for the environment within the organization to believe that if I do something wrong and if I get caught, there will be a very serious action against it. The other thing is perception of detection. Now, the perception of detection gets created by social control. If someone is doing something wrong, he or she should worry that, look, my colleague who sits right next to me will escalate it. There is a perception of detection, and I'll give you a very fundamental example here. Today, if your camera is here, and don't take it personally, but I'm just giving you an example. If there are cameras here, and we've actually put Montblanc pens on every table for every participant just to write, but not to take home. Not to take home. No one will take it home because there is a camera watching you. So the perception of detection is the biggest deterrent of fraud. So when you go back into your organizations, I think the fundamental question which should come into your mind, how do you create an environment wherein people have this perception of getting caught if they do something wrong, right? The question is, are we catching everything which is happening? That's the question which you need to take back. Because it should not be like a ticking time bomb which explodes one day. Globally, organizations have started looking at compliance as an investment because non-compliance is not an option. A non-compliance can bring a company down. Corporate compliance needs to become a priority. It needs to become an investment, and there is a return attached to the investment, and the return is you will not get caught. If you get caught, you are compliant, and if you're non-compliant, it's a huge cost. Thank you very much.
The Indian government has introduced several regulatory changes to strengthen the Companies Act 2013. In his address, former Supreme Court Judge Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan enumerated a few points that would now give the Act more teeth to clamp down on corporate fraud.
Even though we have passed several laws, as a judge I had a lot of occasion to decide lot of matters involving fraud investigation on various aspects under the Companies Act 1956. As a company judge, almost 20 years, the High Court as well as Supreme Court. I hardly had an occasion to decide any matter under the new Companies Act. So I thought he's got an opportunity for me to study the provisions of the new Companies Act 2013 and how the Act looks upon fraud and investigation. What I have seen looking at the whole Companies Act 2013 is very interesting to note. It is a matter of preventive legislation. It is the legislation never thought to find out, we are not looking at the corporate world or everybody is fraud. In spite of that, we have got a host of materials to show fraud in the new company under the Companies Act 1956. If you look at the scam, or starting from Ashar Mehta's scam, then lot of Satyam Computers and so many. But this was from a point of view to prevent, how can I prevent this fraud? I have few very important provisions I have seen, is this preventive mechanism. That's why even the auditors have a responsibility. Those audit the accounts of the company has got a responsibility. If they found out any traces of fraud in the function of the company, they necessarily report to the board or to the audit committee. And in turn, after getting the reply from them, they have to inform the central government. This is a preventive mechanism. So at the very initial stage, at the time of auditing or accounts of the company, you can find out is there any traces of fraud. The main difficulty and many complaint about system is delay. So this is a special mechanism by which a fraud is reported. It can be investigated by the special team. And another aspect I have found that under the new regime that has all been referred to, these are whistleblowers. So that's also a check. And another thing also I have noticed is that is a class action. That's a very, very welcome suggestion. Class action, of course, is known to us in the civil law. We have decided so many cases where in the public interest litigation also so many persons join together and file a case in the Supreme Court, or we have got a lot of cases in the High Court as well as in the civil court also. But this has also given a statutory recognition under the New Companies Act. Because rather than going, a lot of cases, the Sarada pony scheme, and a lot of chit matters also, how the chit fund had duped the investors or depositors. So they can have a class action. They can join together and litigate. I'm not taking much of time. I can go on because provisions are so large. Thank you very much.
The third speaker for the day was the former Commissioner of Delhi Police, Neeraj Kumar, who stressed on the need for development of capacities of law enforcement agencies in dealing with economic crime.
Now, the points I will try to make today are mainly, number one, that many people confuse between white-collar crime and economic crime. Economic crime is a wide term, whereas white-collar crime are crimes by professionals, by civil servants, by people who are in authority, and using their authority, using their positions, they try to commit those offenses, whereas economic crimes in general can be committed by others also. The second point, most important point that I wish to make is that the law enforcement is a general statement, but I would like to make it that the capacity or the ability of law enforcement agencies in the country as far as dealing with economic offenses is concerned is rather limited. So one area in which one thrust area can be to develop the capacities and the ability of law enforcement agencies, be it the police, be it the enforcement directorate, be it any agency, to be given special expertise for improving their capacity to deal with economic crime. Today, even today, a man would first go to a police station, then he will perhaps be directed to the crime branch or to the economic offences wing before he can reach a federal investigative body. So the need to develop capacities is at that level. And only when we do that, it would make a difference. It is my sense, as a citizen of India, maybe not as a police officer or former police officer or anything else, that the wide chasms that exist in our society between the rich and the poor, the state of our infrastructure, the state of our the poor development of our infrastructure and the condition of our country in this day is to a great extent on account of corruption, which also I consider to be an economic crime, and economic offenses. Economic offenses affect people like you and me, but not to that extent as it affects a poor man who has to toil from morning to evening in the heat, or has to plow fields, or has to work in factories under very inhuman conditions. It are these people who eventually are the victims. And the more we turn the blind eye to economic offenses, to white-collar crime, the more the disparities would increase and social frictions would arise. With these stray thoughts and general remarks, I would thank you for giving me the opportunity of speaking to this august audience. Thank you.
Archana Nigam, the additional CGA in the Ministry of Finance highlighted the need to develop a comparable risk management framework across government, public-funded bodies and corporate houses, which would go a long way in standardizing internal audits.
I've been in audit for the last 33 years of my career. Believe you me, empowerment of audit is so key. Audit without any teeth is so much of a waste of time and so very demoralizing for those of us who are into the audit practice. So the fact that the Administrative Reforms Commission talks about an independence, duties, time frame, and mechanisms for the administration of the Office of Chief Internal Auditor to be provided by statute is, to my mind, the best that could have happened. The standards for the internal audit to be done by these chief internal auditors in the ministries are to be developed by the CNAG. And the audit committee, much like that in the Companies Act, talks about chairman and 2 members who would be people of eminence from the public field. Therefore, I think it's important that, I think there are 2 key things which we have to understand. One, that this has led to what I would call the empowerment of the internal audit function, which, as I said, is important. And 2, that there is this thing about working in tandem. It's not enough that we do internal audit. It's also important that we do it in tandem with the CNAG. The point that I'm making, that the one that I keep telling all my officers is, hey, don't do 10 audits. Do one good audit, on the basis of which I can issue a guidance note for similar ministries. And believe you me, in areas like the sectors of social development, if the kind of risk that you will find, whether they're financial risks or operational risks, will very often be similar from the NRHM to the MNREGA to the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan to whatever. So that is important. The key interactional takeaway or the interactional dialogue that I would like from something like this, from a conference like this, would be how do we develop a comparable risk management framework across government, public-funded bodies, and the private corporates. I think that is very important. So that, I think, is something that we need to do. Thank you very much.
With a rapidly changing business landscape, companies are now dealing with evolving methods of fraud like social media fraud, e-commerce fraud, cloud computing fraud, and virtual or cryptocurrency. The summit also put the focus on inefficiencies in existing fraud risk management mechanisms and new ways to tackle the evolving dynamics of the fraud environment.
I think the stage has been perfectly set for this discussion on winds of change. Fraud, as far as I understand, it has existed for many years, perhaps since the time mankind has existed. So this has ever existed. Even from a perspective of the way we are auditing, the way we are forensically auditing or performing investigation, the basics have remained the same. Although today, when you look at fraud investigation, the tools used have changed dramatically over the last 10 years or so. In this evolving environment where there are these changes taking place, there's technology which is coming to place, how do you see the role of internal audit evolving in fraud prevention and detection? And also, is there an expectation which has changed from the management side on the internal audit function in the fraud prevention?
Sure, I think, as they say, change is the only constant. And in this case, the expectation from management has actually changed from how we deal with fraud, how much we are in terms of business partnering, how much value are we adding to business. It's gone are the days when our approach to audit is more retrospective. We have to be proactive in identifying the risks, and therefore our role as internal auditors have become more onerous. We owe a much higher degree of responsibility to our various stakeholders, including the audit committees, And therefore, the key change is that we have to identify upfront rather than do a detective work at the end. I would say that is the kind of value add that is expected from internal auditors, from management.
Praveen, would you like to add some perspective from your industry experience?
Yeah. So if I have to say from last 10 to 15 years that I've been doing internal audit, I would say that initially it used to be all internal audit is responsible for doing a process, compliance related work. Now it has moved. So it is much more aligned to business. It's also much more greater emphasis on fraud detection and prevention. Management expectation, and I will not even say just management, the entire stakeholders, whether it's governments or regulators, the expectations have changed multifold. The Companies Act has added responsibilities, and that also brings the challenge. The challenge is that are we equipped to meet those expectations? Because we traditionally being a process, compliance, cost, expense related expertise. So the challenge for internal audit profession as such is how do we equip ourselves to meet those challenges, I think.
Coming from a little different industry, you have been in telecom and now in insurance, where the number of transactions are fairly large. Means from your perspective, where do you see internal audit role evolving in this entire gamut of fraud prevention and detection?
Clearly, Sumit, I've seen the changes that's happening, and especially when you look at the requirement of New Companies Act. Clearly, there is a big onerous task that's been put on now heads of internal audit by the board, because all the independent directors are now looking at heads of internal audit to make sure that to provide an assurance on the fraud risk. I think that's one key change that's coming in, and which itself gives one a clear thought in terms of how one can manage that kind of a onerous and responsibility and the ask that's coming in from the board as well as the audit committee. I think that's one clear change, and the way we try to leverage it as audit fraternity is try to look at to go back to the basics, right? And when you go back to the basics, you look at what are the three key pillars on where you can contribute towards the fraud risks. I think, and if you look at those three, one looks at, one is of course is the prevention side. So prevention, detection, and response. Primarily, internal audit role has always been on detection framework. I think that's where one clearly looks at when you do an audit, you identify an issue, and it is primarily loops back and highlight that to the management. But I think clearly the ask is now to make sure that the risks, that issues being highlighted are also get fixed by the management.
Technology has given us power to transact at the speed of light in this world, but also has given power to people to use the same technology to commit fraud of a large scale and at the point of the button. What are some of the 2 or 3 or key controls in this new world which you believe are working most effectively in your organization, which people in this room can learn from? This time let me start from Surat. Yeah, Surat.
See, per my opinion, most of the companies today are working on a very robust ERP platform. Once you are designing a system, when you do a blueprinting and walkthrough, you create a very, very robust system, watertight system, without really realizing whether that would be actually would be a vehicle which you can move on the ground. Because business has to run, and an ERP, or for that matter any control, needs to enhance business value, not act as complete deterrents to doing business or doing a transaction. So in that aspect also, many a times we do very watertight compartmentalization of controls and processes. Once we implement it, we suddenly unscrew them. We say, this is not working, that is not working. We unscrew them, but we don't put adequate enough compensatory controls around this, because we have a philosophy now that manual working is something which is wrong. Signing of documents is something which is a thing of the past, of the 80s and 70s. So people want to do everything electronically. They pass on data, documents, authorizations electronically. And in many cases, they are passing on this sort of authorization even to their juniors. So what they end up doing is that on the piece of paper you have the best of systems in place, but in practical life you have actually diluted very, very critical corners of the same, thereby subjecting it to serious misuse, threat, which could be pointed out by an auditor within the normal course of business, could be flagged up by a whistleblower, or it could actually compound and lead to an organizational downfall also.
Thanks for that. With that note, thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting panel.
The second annual Economic Times Fraud and Investigation Summit 2015 came to a close with the Commissioner of Delhi Police, B.S. Bassi, providing insights into the changing face of Delhi's police force.
You see, fortunately for us, we also are part of the society. Our new recruits are, a lot of our new recruits are having adequate knowledge of computers. So right from the day one when they enter police service, whether even as constable, they are capable of using computers. They are capable of handling Facebook. They are capable of using Twitter. And of course, in the process, and some of them who happen to be, particularly in the higher ranks, those who happen to be BTechs or MCAs, they are capable of handling these cases. You see, in Delhi Police in particular, we recognize this need quite early, and we were among the first police forces in the country to set up a cyber cell. We have a very competent cyber cell in our economic offences wing, and now we are creating capacity in each of our districts, because as I said, the number of those Natwar Lal type cheating cases are increasing. And they do not require very, expert, if I may say, investigation. It's a fairly mechanical. You are trying to locate the person who has swindled money through the internet. So you have certain definite processes. And if you have to go through those processes, that can be learnt by, you don't need to be a systems analyst or a programmer to do that sort of investigation. So we are having adequate capacity as far as our cyber unit is concerned, and we are now developing that capacity in our every district. Now, every recruit who is going to pass out from this year onward, because this training is already undergoing, I'm talking about constabulary training, 25% of their final exam will be conducted on computers. So that means every constable or every lady constable who is going to pass out sometime in the month of September, her final examination, the indoor examination, 75% will comprise in the shape of traditional papers where she or he will have to write. As 25% of our question papers will comprise of the computerized tests. Eventually, in next 2 years, our objective is to have at least 50% of and we perhaps are the only police organization in the country who will have a computer-based final examination for even constabulary. Thank you.
Fraud has become a very important topic in corporate India today because there are legislations and laws which have come in very focused on fraud in terms of how companies today are trying to mitigate the risk of fraud and secure shareholder value. So I think today corporates are more interested to understand how they can mitigate the risk of fraud. Are there any good practices which exist in the environment which they can replicate within their existing organizations? And also to know better what are the situations where things could go wrong and how do they need to respond to those kind of situations?